Good morning, everybody. My name's Charlie Boss. I am, in my day job, commercial director for the Walt Disney Company's sports businesses here in Europe and Africa. So that's ESPN, Fox Sports, a handful of others. But I also am enormously lucky to have a second role as a trustee of London Sport. And I feel doubly lucky today because I get to host this wonderful conversation today about how the trends in digital change the way that people get active. So for anyone who started today with a digital Pilates session as part of Active London, I think you'll have seen firsthand how digital is changing to some extent the way we take part in getting fit and active in London. And I'm very fortunate to be joined by 5 incredibly bright minds on the topic. So my first job is to introduce you to our other panelists today. And I'm going to go alphabetically by surname, starting with Sasha Corbin. So Sasha is a professional netball player for the Saracens Mavericks and has played regularly for England in the past. She's also founder of Solo Sessions, which is both a physical and digital way of getting girls to develop their netball skills. Sasha, would you like to say hello to the audience?
Hey. Hey guys. So I am Sasha Corbin. I was born and raised in Tottenham, North London. Currently have 72 caps for England. I'm an England netball ambassador, and I last captained the team Saracens Mavericks. So yeah, I do run a business called Solo Sessions. It's about training alone and being able to develop your skills away from your team environment. And obviously with COVID happening, like that went crazy, and organically in my mind, I wanted to do more. So I also do deliver sessions outside of like to schools and clubs, and then coach masterclasses and do London-based community sessions for free for young people. And yeah, recently, because of lockdown, I tried to get innovative and do virtual training sessions from start to finish. And I launched a program called Boot Camp, which is something I'd love for you guys to see, to get a flavor of what I put out there. So if you can, roll the VT.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sasha. Well, next up, I'd like to introduce Ali Donnell, Executive Director for Digital Communications and Marketing at Sport England, who are responsible for helping people play sport and get across England, and of course, a huge supporter of everything London Sport does. Ali, perhaps let's say hello as well.
Hi there. Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I think, you mentioned my role in terms of digital comms and marketing, but more broadly, Sport England, like our job is essentially to make sure that everyone in England, regardless of their age, their background, their ability, can take part in sport and physical activity. And we run big behavioural change campaigns like This Girl Can, Join the Movement, We Are Undefeatable, and digital plays a really important part in all of those campaigns. So I'll talk a bit today about what's happened to activity levels over the last 6 to 8 months and where digital fitness fits in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ali. Next up, I'll introduce Stephen Scales. So Stephen is Client Services Director at UK Active, an organisation with over 4,000 members across the public, private and third sectors, all working together to get people active. Stephen, welcome.
Everyone, thanks for having me on today. As Charlie said, our aim is to improve the health of the nation by making more people more active more often. First elephant in the room, this is a glorified shed. It allows me to hide away from my family for any awkward moments. But importantly, I'm not going to speak about that today. I'm going to speak about how the physical activity sector, especially looking at facilities, leisure centres, have been able to pivot throughout the time of COVID, but how they can build that into the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. Next up, let me introduce you all to Lenka Isfanova. So Lenka is digital sports consultant at 7 League. She's also an avid ultra runner and women's sports advocate. And on the last point, with the goal of addressing the imbalance in sport industry, Lenka has also co-founded Upswing, which is a community for women working in the digital and sports industries. Lenka, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charlie, for having me. And Sasha, I'm definitely going to sign up to your bootcamp sessions. As Charlie said, sport is very close to my heart, and I believe in its power to change your life for better, and in a way change the world for better. So it really plays a special part in my life. And obviously digital is what I do. It's my work. It's my second passion. So being here today talking about my two passion is a great pleasure of mine. So really looking forward to having fruitful discussions today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lenka. And last but by no means least, and certainly the man most on brand today, we have David Templer, head trainer, F45 training. He's there working on the front line participation in gyms, both in person and online. And in the latter space, that includes his large and ever-growing following on TikTok. David, good to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. So yeah, as Charlie's alluded to, I've got a fairly big social media following, which I've used to leverage everything that I've been doing online in the studio. So obviously during lockdown, we've been doing a lot of online stuff, not only just for F45, I've got my own online personal training business, and I've had to sort of really reshuffle how I've been doing things to refilm lots of stuff so people can do it online as opposed to being face-to-face with me or in the studio. And I guess, for the purpose of today, it's talking about how you need to have that social media presence and online presence in order to work hand in hand with the face-to-face stuff to do with personal training as well.
Terrific. Thank you. Look, I think we have a really interesting and diverse set of takes and opinions around how digital is changing the way we all get active. And I think the obvious starting place is to talk straight away about how COVID-19 is changing that set of dynamics. I think we can all say from first-hand experience that our ability to get active and the ways we do it is changing, not just because of long-term trends, but also because of some very immediate pressures on all of our lives that come from our reaction to COVID-19, our reaction to lockdown, and all the factors it's having. Just before I ask the first question, for the audience, if you have questions for me or for any speakers, please do submit them. I will either weave them in as we go, we'll get to them to the end. So please rest assured that your voice will get heard. And I'm actually going to start off with you, Ali. What has Sport England's research shown you about the impact COVID-19 is having on how people are getting active?
So, unsurprisingly, there's been a massive disruption to levels of activity, not just in how people do it, but also how people feel about doing it. So just to set a bit of context to that, the disruption is really significant because there could be long-term impacts on people's lives and people's health and people's behaviours, but also because before this period, so pre-March, which feels a lifetime ago now, activity levels in England had reached record high and the trajectory was really positive. And I think from our perspective, there had been a particularly important uptick amongst audiences who often struggle to be active. So older people, women, disabled people, people with long-term health conditions. So, those are areas that we in the sector have been increasingly focused on in recent years. And unfortunately, the disruption of the pandemic has especially badly hit some of those groups. And some of that's because, natural level of anxiety about going out, being around others, but also practically because shielding requirements for some of those groups. So I think just to come back to your question, it's very typical, I think, of people to assume that the early months of lockdown brought, some sort of boom in activity beyond what we saw before, because you were all going outside and seeing people running, cycling and doing things in numbers we hadn't seen before. But actually what we were seeing there was a boom in different types of activity and not in actual activity levels themselves. And I think that's where the acceleration digital fitness fits in and what we're talking about today. So we know, of course, there's been a really positive acceleration towards digital fitness consumption, and lots of people here will be testament to that. Some of that was really obvious for everyone. So for example, the explosion in apps like Couch to 5K, the kind of conversation around the high-end products like, say, Peloton, and plus the rising profile of people like Joe Wicks. So some of that was really obvious, some of it was less obvious, but there definitely was acceleration towards that kind of offer. And that's been really great to see, new touch points of audiences, lots of creativity. However, I think, it's only fair to point out that some of that early experimentation has tapered off. So we've gone from sort of, I think it was around 23% in April of adults across England using some sort of online fitness or at-home activity, and that's dropped down to sort of 10 to 13% in mid-September. And that makes total sense when you think about, the principles of supply and demand. So you had a period of time where you could do very little, so you tried new things. That might have been, something on YouTube, it might have been, running or whatever. And there's a moment now, I think, just finally, as we see tightening of restrictions again, for digital to play a much wider role in supporting people's activity through winter. So, we know through our insight that people feel really anxious right now, and that motivation is a huge challenge, and that digital has a really important role to play here, not just through, providing a product or a service, but also through, reaching audience with digital motivational messaging, reassuring ads and so on. So hopefully the sector can learn some lessons from the early months of lockdown and help us to really overcome some of the behavioural hurdles that we're seeing now.
That's really interesting, Ali. And I think, when you talk about that sort of sustainability of the early boom we saw in digital things, so some headliners like Joe Wicks, and we have a couple in this group, even with Sasha and with David, who probably benefited from that initial boom in digital at-home participation. Yeah, how do you make it sustainable? And I think we'll come on to more of that later, but Lenka, I'm fascinated for your perspective here on how much of this is new and COVID related and how much of it is underlying trend.
I agree with Ali, to your point. I think digital play a huge part in actually democratizing the access to sport. And we at Seven Eagle believe that COVID is an accelerant of trends that have been already happening. The way we consume sport, the way we play or participate in sport has been already changing. The COVID actually, or the global pandemic, has accelerated those trends. In terms of sort of businesses perspective, I think those who invested in digital before the global pandemic have been able to adapt fairly quickly to those sort of accelerating trends. And an obvious example, as Ali mentioned, is Joe Wicks, who have managed to capitalize on the global pandemic and obviously got the nation active from day one. But what I would like to point out is that he hasn't just appeared, in the first day of the global pandemic on YouTube. He actually has invested throughout his whole career in digital, in working with schools, etc. So really those organizations who have invested previously and before COVID have been able to adapt fairly quickly. And actually one of the projects that I'm leading within Seven League, and one that is very close to my heart, is the Sport England project that, Sport England actually realized and recognized the need of NGBs to increase their focus on digital even before pandemic, to actually survive in the new landscape, in the new era of sport. And we have helped them to design and create a project which is called Digital Leadership Program. And it's aimed at increasing the knowledge, but also capabilities, and really using the tool as, I would say, a link between, or the connector between seeing the sport, watching it, consuming it on your phone, etc., to actually participating. And this is something we have done in the past for England Netball, especially capitalizing on their Commonwealth win, but also for other NGBs, really looking at how we can accelerate or link, watching the sport to the activity, to actually taking up the sport. So that's where digital has the power.
Thank you, Lenka. I guess we're really lucky here to have a couple of people on this panel who are really at the front line of this, with Sasha and with David, who have both had to, I think, change what they do to react to lockdown with solo sessions and with F45. Perhaps if we start with you, Sasha, what have you had to do differently during lockdown?
Yeah, so it's been interesting, definitely, because netball for me, I've always had sessions online. So I had about 90 videos there ready to kind of go for anyone that wanted to train alone. or train by themselves and see skills for what they are by themselves. And it was really interesting because that was automatically tapped into by the netball community to kind of increase their skill level and just kind of enjoyment of the game. So obviously when you're not with your team, it's really difficult. It's tough times, and you're really craving that kind of competition and things like that, and it wasn't happening. So what was great was the challenges that I ended up doing. Firstly, it was workouts, and then it turned into like netball and dance routines. That turned into like TikToks and Instagram posts, and then it just became really engaging that way. So I think just kind of coming up with different ways to kind of engage with the audience. And I'm just listening to what Lenka was saying. Yes, England Netball have done a great job as well in terms of like they got a virtual netball club, and that's for their members. And I was a part of that as well, virtually coaching for their under 11s. And it's just been really great, like the engagement that netballers are taking to this way of learning. And it's kind of a perfect way to kind of, especially the solo sessions message, which is you can still improve alone and you can still improve your skills away from your team environment to be better for the team for when you come back. So it's been a really great time to kind of push that and just allow people to know that they can still do a lot, even though they're away from their teams right now.
And Sasha, I think you're a great example of someone who put all that hard graft into building an audience before lockdown, so that when that time came, you could capitalize on opportunities. Just before I go to David, I know that one of the things you've done, Sasha, in the last couple of weeks is take a bunch of your in-person training, particularly with schools and clubs, and bring that digitally. Do you want to just mention that big initiative of yours?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I just think it's important for everyone to be active as well. And I want people to try different things and new ways of training. And it's the fitness that we were doing. It involves everything from landing to ball work to core stability, basically everything that you need for netball, which is basically core to life. So it's been fantastic to be able to do that. And I've just been working on a project for that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And look, David, we can see you're in a gym. You're someone who is playing in both these spaces very actively. How has your world changed since March?
Oh, it's been mental, to be honest with you. I think so. Luckily, the model with F45 is pretty much lift and shift, so it's all directed back end in a database. Now, a lot of the training that I do revolves around lifting weights, which is, we've already mentioned Joe before, but he's a good friend of mine. And anytime somebody comes to me with a question that they want to work out in home, I've always just pushed them over to him, because I say, why try and copy what somebody else is doing very well? Then COVID hit, and I was like, I need to start doing something like that. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to monetize any of my stuff. But going back to F45, so I think we've done excellently in lifting and shifting that model. It's been keeping essentially everything exactly the same, but changing the exercises so you can do them at home. And I alluded to it earlier, I've got my own online personal training business. And again, I'm trying not to copy or repeat anything that anybody else is doing in the industry. So mine is very much centered around lifting weights. Now, not very many people have got access to weights at home. And if they did have the money to buy them, they just weren't available at the time we went into lockdown. So I think I've had to change a lot of stuff, sort of refilming a lot of content using resistance bands and dumbbells, what anybody can get hold of. But I think, again, a lot of people have said it already. I think planning prior to lockdown, just planning for every eventuality. I quickly learned early on in my career that you've only got a certain amount of hours in a day. In order to really maximize what you're doing, you need to have the online presence. You need to be able to scale what you're doing to be able to reach maximal people. So I think I'd already started to do that before this pandemic even came about. And I think the success of everybody who we've spoken about, Joe, Sasha, whoever it is, it's having a good business model prior to that, to then be able to go into different directions as and when stuff comes up.
And look, I think it's really interesting, Dave, that you mentioned business models. I mean, clearly this is your living, right? You know, this is what you do. Has this been a case of a big opportunity for you to grow, or has it been more, how do I make it work so that I can shift that revenue I was getting in person online?
It's been a weird one for me, actually, because I'm salaried with F45, so that all kept going. I just lifted and shifted that, and I moved the studio sessions to online. But I saw my online business fall dramatically, as I said, because people didn't have access to gyms. So what I did, I've rose to TikTok fame over the last year, and I've just got this massive following all of a sudden, and I'm trying to give out educational content on this platform that's shifting away from what was traditionally lip syncing and dance based. Now they're trying to put more of a priority on educating people who are using the platform. So I've actually been lucky enough to work directly with TikTok, and they're paying me to create content on their platform to diversify what they're offering. So from that perspective, I think if you've got knowledge or you've got a niche or you're in an industry, you can capitalize and monetize what you're doing. And I think we're going to go on to talk about this later. I think there's a lot of people who have used their followings to give exercise content, but they're not particularly qualified to do so. And I think that's actually cannibalizing the market. So I think I'm probably a contradiction anyway, because I'm a personal trainer who works face to face, but also I'm a content creator, influencer who makes money online as well. So I think me and myself, I'm a contradiction, but it's quite a good example of how it is actually cannibalizing the industry, and it could have longer term effects later down the line.
Thank you, David. I'm just about to throw to Stephen. Before I do that, interesting question here from the audience that I just want to touch on. And the question is, how can digital interventions encourage physical activity to compete with the multi-billion industry that's unintentionally designed at keeping people sedentary? And the example they give are things like video games, social media, TV. Now, what I want to pick on that question just now is, David, you just mentioned that actually TikTok is working directly with you to think about how they weave in getting people active as part of their offering. And I know as part of the Walt Disney Company that we think very similarly about it being part of our job to ensure that we are helping people live a healthy lifestyle, even if all of our products aren't always designed intentionally and doing that all the time. So yeah, you're working closely with TikTok, and that's part of what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah, massively. So they've got a whole campaign called Learn on TikTok. As I said, they're actually paying me directly to make content along that lines. And it's not only in the fitness industry, they're trying to, I guess, and another thing that's like pretty prevalent now is people in the entertainment industry. They're trying to get people keeping doing what they're doing, but just diversifying it on multiple platforms. So yeah, it's a way to get educational content out there, but it's also a way, I don't know if you know how TikTok works, but it's a good way to get people involved with trends, hashtag, whatever it is. So at the same time as educating people, you can get them active at the same time. I just think it's brilliant that we've got that diversity across all portfolios, and you really need to be playing in every single space, not only selfishly for yourself to survive, but also to, I guess we're all in this industry to help people, right? So if you are ticking every single box, it's giving you the best opportunity to do so.
I think that's a really good idea. I think this idea of it being them versus us is probably the wrong approach. I think we all need to be very partnership spirited to think about how do we work with some of those bigger multi-billion-dollar companies who actually really want the credibility and the ability to give back to their societies that individuals and organizations can work with. So, Stephen, what a great segue to your very broad overview of all the different players in this space, from commercial to public to third sector. Who's doing it really well?
Well, I think to Sasha and David's point is everyone had to do it at a stage, and some people through investment, to Lenka's point, had a bit more of a foresight or an investment into a bit of a foundation to be able to do so. I'm going to give a couple of examples, but the consistency between the three that I'll mention is of why they were actually doing it in the first place. A lot of it was around engagement, although they were at different scenarios, and they were really, really clear as to who they wanted to engage, and that informed the medium that they were going to use, whether it be social media, whether it be wearables, whether it be who they would.
I think we've just lost Stephen there, which is the danger of presenting from your corner. But Stephen, you're back with us now, and I will pick up on that point again.
Wonders of technology there as well. Hopefully I'm back. First example I'd like to give is Box 12. So Box 12 is a small boutique in Stoke, of all places, where I used to work for a while. But they'd only opened 6 weeks before the lockdown. So they didn't really have an established customer base. So the way in which they approached their digital pivot, because it was very, very much a physical offering, was actually about brand awareness and creating community. And they based that on customer experience. So they did an awful lot around using partnerships with digital mystery shops, really understanding and reinforcing the service, but actually used Instagram to quite a large effect, to a point where they engage with more people than their clubs would ever be able to cope with. The benefit of that is and the clear direction is that they knew that they needed to pivot from that brand awareness to, as David said, it has to result in money. And when they were able to reopen, they had a much bigger pre-sale waiting list than they ever would have had if pre-COVID. And that was the clear understanding of, this is why we're doing it. Everyone Active is another. It was, and to Ali's point earlier on, it wasn't just about a virtual class offering. It was about how can we communicate and engage with a site portfolio that's bigger than 150 sites, with a member base that is between cradle to grave. So what are the services? And the basic foundation of that was, what is the best way in which we can communicate and engage with those people? It wasn't even in the first instance about exercise, it was about communication. And what that did was inform how they could then get the right services that, as and when restrictions began to ease, people were still resonating with the brand.
So I'll pick up there with Stephen leaving off. And I think really the theme there in those examples from Stephen, which is that they really touch on people being very intentional about the audiences they go after and the way they go after them. So Stephen, apologies that technology has cut you short, but I think that's a really key point. So as we start to think about audiences, I'm really interested to think about who are the people who have gained most or been helped most by this pivot towards digital. So Ali, back to you. If we now think about what this means for customers and participants, can you set the scene again for which groups have benefited most from this acceleration towards digital delivery?
Yeah, so we've done quite a lot of research in the last 6 to 8 months through some work with Comres, Savanta Comres, through our Active Live surveys, and through our campaign evaluation. And just before I share the audiences who have benefited the most, it's probably just worth saying that, you know, they're not the only audiences who have benefited, but they're the kind of you know, the upper end of people who've used the platforms and shifted towards digital. So I guess unsurprisingly, the most popular audience for this sort of content has been 16 to 34-year-olds, also women and people at home with children more generally. And there are likely to be lots of reasons for that, some of which will be really obvious. So for the younger audience as well, they're already digital native, so they're very familiar with navigating the platforms that are relevant and very adept to, you know, flexing to new platforms. That makes total sense. We also know that lots of digital offices are marketed heavily towards that audience, as well as to women. And I think the point about people at home with children, and I count myself here, is, you know, there's something obviously incredibly flexible about online and digital fitness and exercise. So you can access it really easily. You can do it in short bursts, and it can be done wherever you can fit in. So I'm a huge fan of the Fit app, and they have 25-minute classes, which when you have a 3-year-old at home is pretty handy, actually. So that's obvious, I think. And I think just one other point I'd make about these audiences is that there's something really interesting about when you dig into the insight around the people who are likely to access the activity this way, is that while a lot of the sector did very well to adapt their delivery online early on, what people are telling us is that it's clear that not everybody was capable of adapting the whole user journey, and that actually did turn off quite a lot of early experimenters outside of those groups. So it limited growth a little bit. So what I mean is, you know, it's not just as simple as sort of flicking your class onto Zoom or whatever, you know, groups and teams and sports might have done. There is a whole other side to this. So how do you deliver good quality coaching online, for example? You know, what else is happening around the tech? So that did mean that some of the growth was limited, or you saw lots of early experimentation that then tapered off. So I know we're going to come on to talk about those who sort of missed out, but, you know, those are the groups that we're seeing, you know, most take to this type of activity.
And I think you're right, Ali. It's definitely worth delving into the losers as well as the winners. Before we do that, Sasha, I'm interested to see what you've seen on your channel. Who's participating more now than they were before?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to mention that literally what you're saying, Ali, is correct, because I have like 95% women and girls on all my platforms, from Instagram, YouTube to Facebook. It is literally women and girls. And the one thing I would say it captured the most in terms of a grouping, I was very surprised about the amount of teens that got involved, and parents, and not even just mothers. Like dads were getting involved in the fun kind of netball dance workouts and challenges, and that was something I was really surprised at. So that was definitely a huge group.
I'm really interested in that, actually, only because I know Disney has thought a lot about how you can use digital to bring the family together to get active. And we did a 24-hour challenge a year ago that was based on doing exactly that around the Invincible brand. So, Sasha, are you seeing parents and kids engaging more together through some of the stuff you do?
Yeah, literally. Like the reason I know is only because they sent videos, and it almost became a thing where so the Solar Sessions Instagram page was becoming so interactive that they would send their videos in, and then it was almost a case of who's going to get posted. And I loved that because people wanted to be posted of doing the challenges and wanted to engage, and it was just a new way completely to how I'd ever used those channels before. It was so interactive. And before, just touching on that, there was schools and PE teachers that would engage with my channel, probably because there's skills and drills, and obviously you can take that for your lessons, etc. But this is the first time that actual individuals were getting in touch, and young girls and the parents and siblings, and it was just so nice to see that group together. Yeah.
And I have to say, for anyone who hasn't watched any Solo Sessions content, one of the most enjoyable bits of someone who is not a great netball player, for obvious reasons, well, for many reasons, watching Sasha engage with her sister on that, who's another elite netball player, is a lot of fun. And it's actually an interesting time to bring in a few of the audience questions, because there's an awful lot of questions about how various groups are benefiting or not benefiting in these circumstances. And one of the questions is about how Black and other BME minority groups are being impacted. I'm interested to get, perhaps Ali, with you, does your research teach about whether there's any specific impact for those groups?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that Asian and minority ethnic groups are among the group, are among the audiences who are less active. So that's a general inequality that has existed long before COVID. We have our Active Lives, it's our annual survey where it's a huge piece of research coming out in a couple of weeks' time, which will show some of the impact of the early months of lockdown, so you'll be able to see that. But generally, the inequalities, both for people, ethnicities, plus disabled people, older people, etc. Those have been exacerbated in lockdown. We know that, and so that's obviously something that we're deeply concerned about. So I mentioned at the very top, one of the things that we're seeing come true is that the inequalities, the work that we had done to try and redress some of the problems there, have sort of gone back a bit. So we've taken a couple of steps back, and I think we will see in the latest the next iterations of our research that BME audiences will be included in that. That said, I think sometimes for specific socioeconomic groups, for example, or disabled people is another good example, that sometimes the digital offering is actually, if it's tailored properly, can be incredibly helpful. So let's take women again, a group where there's been a gender gap for a long time, and that's why This Girl Can exist, for example. But I mentioned that actually women have found the flexibility of using digital and the kind of availability of content to be a real positive. And I think Sasha's probably the example that she's given there is testament to that. So, in a roundabout way, yes, I think the audiences who struggled before, are struggling now too. But there are some kind of bright spots too in the digital side of things.
And I think it's a really valid point to think about just the fact that this shift to digital isn't always an equal one. Lenka, I'm interested in your perspective here of how much of this, again, is about COVID, or it's just an acceleration of things that we might see anyway, even without lockdown.
Yeah, I think so. I think of the pandemic as an accelerant. As I mentioned earlier, the way we consume sport, the way we participate in it, and to Ali's point, there will be the groups that will sort of suffer, but I would say that digital actually democratized the access. So we're getting closer to the 100% penetration when it comes to internet access, and over the next few years, I think we'll be fairly close, if not at 100%. So again, sport has gone through a transformational change, a huge transformational change in 2020. we actually call it a third age of sport, where we think in the 2020s, the sport will be physical, will be actually physical, but everything around it, the access, etc., will be digital. So it will be interesting to see, and it will be important for the organization to adapt to those. And as Stephen, you mentioned, knowing the audience and knowing your audience, where they are, what are their pain points, will be key to get the sport to them. So it will be interesting to see how organizations adapt to those.
And I'm right thinking, I think, Lenka, that you as Sedentary have just released a report about the third age of sport that people can go to for more if they're interested.
Yes, definitely. It's thirdageofsport.com. But we talk about those really key areas that, again, the trends that have been happening is just COVID really accelerated it. And yes, sport now doesn't compete just with the different sports, but it competes with life. There is the attention economy. Again, you compete with gaming, you compete with the likes of Netflix and even Disney Channel, to your point. So it's really important to really understand your audience and understand where they are, what they are using, what are their pain points, and then adapt to those. There's a shift towards players and actually them having the power and having a voice, such as Sasha, taking the ownership and actually having an important role in getting people active. Sport consumption trends, I mean, that's really important, looking at Gen Z and actually the sport funds, 50%, only 50% of them actually, identify themselves as a sport fund. So definitely there is a change. There is a change the way they consume sport. It's clear that they might not watch the whole match. It's about, the key highlights, the key bits, but again, delivered to their taste, if that makes sense. So yeah, really interesting topics and discussion we have had as part of our manifesto, which is the third age of sport. So definitely recommend reading.
And actually, now's a really good time to bring in a few more of the audience questions. And there's a couple about what this really means for gyms and physical trainers. So one of the questions, by the way, which I don't think is right for us to address here, is about what does London moving into Tier 2 mean for gyms? But all to say that I think it's a very fluid situation in terms of getting real clarity on all of that. And so I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on that now. But I do think it alludes to a very specific question, which is people aren't completely clear on what isn't and is okay in this current environment. And for you, David, what does that mean? How have you found it trying to encourage people to come back into the gym when it's safe and obviously legally allowed to do so?
Luckily, I think the current regulations lend itself to the model of F45. So, I mean, I can show you here. We've actually got socially distanced squares set up in the studio. So we can safely have 18 people in the studio, all socially distanced, working out at the same time. It just meant that we need to change the focus of our marketing. Instead of saying what functional training is, what the gym can offer, it's more how can we create a safe environment for people to feel safe to come in and train. But obviously, we can only fit 36 people in here, so instantly at half our capacity, which either means we've got to put more classes on, or we just have to take the hit of having only 18 people. But I think, yeah, it changed it massively, having PPE, hand sanitizer, everything's cleaning. Like, we have to pay for teams to come in to make sure it's a safe environment. And I think again, we actually didn't open before COVID either, so we had 0 members before going into lockdown, so we had to grow that base online. And now we've got nearly 100 members. Aside from that, we've had to put lots of emphasis into making sure that people, 1, knows it's a safe place, 2, it's an established business in a new area, and then 3, then we've got to focus on getting people in. So I think it's been up against us massively, but when you look at the likes of group classes like this versus an open gym, I think people are feeling more comfortable in these environments where they've got their own equipment, they've got their own squares, they've got their own everything sanitized, and it's a lot more peace of mind for our members coming in.
And I think, without putting too much on the spot, Stephen, I'm right in saying that all the data shows that gyms are actually a very safe place to be at the moment.
Yes, safer comparatively to other sectors. I'm happy to answer the Tier 2 question as well. If London moves into Tier 2 as per government legislation, currently gyms still remain open under guidelines, and the main point is consumer confidence safety is the key message around it. It's people feeling safe in an environment.
Perfect. That's very clear. Thank you. And actually, I'm interested in picking up on one point you made earlier, David, around what this means for some of the PTs who are now having to compete with people who maybe aren't professionals. Do you think this has been an opportunity for most professional trainers, or is this really a risk to their livelihood?
I mean, you only had to log on to Instagram to see the amount of options you had available for workouts during proper lockdown. I think some of it, the onus is on the personal trainer. If you don't have a social media presence in this day and age, then you're making it very difficult for yourself. But I think in a world, wrongly, where likes and followers mean that you've got not only influence, but also this false knowledge, I think we're building a world whereby not only is exercise readily available, we don't know if the people who are given that exercise are qualified. And then again, people would rather do somebody with a high workout because they think that's what they need to do to look like them, as opposed to going to professional trainers to get that proper personal training or online classes, whatever it is. So I think entry into the market is very low. People's knowledge on the subject isn't vast, and then it's making, I guess it's just cannibalizing the market. So in the long run, where people have got access to all this free content, the people with the big followings can monetize their content with either YouTube views or brand deals, whatever it is. And it's the personal trainers who don't have that following, can't monetize free content, that are going to miss out.
And I think it's a really super point around, which both you and Stephen have made, David, around this idea of safety and consumer confidence. You know, all of the research that comes out of our Disney parks and resorts business tells us that the number one factor that gauges whether someone's going to enjoy their experience or not is if they feel safe. And that has never been more important, right? And so just following up from that, I mean, Stephen, from your perspective, how do you see a way forward here for the industry to collectively come together and maybe address some of these challenges?
I think it's collaboration, working in partnership. Lots of different partners are on the call at the moment, and lots of different expertise. Is that, use the prism of digital, is that I think the mistake a lot of organizations made, I've certainly made it as an operator in the past, is you try and do everything yourself. Where are there tech companies, the people that do this day to day, the people who are with different perspective, there's evidence from Sport England, there's evidence from UK Active. There's huge amounts of information out there. And I go back to that, why people are doing it. I think there's a collective vulnerability. There's fear of closure, there's a fear of inactivity. And I think the only way we'll address that is working together collectively to set that path moving forward. First and foremost, that starts with activity societally. And again, back to that consumer confidence is the more awareness at government level, at public level, that people have of physical activity.
And Ali, I'm keen to get your view on this as well, because I think that's a really interesting point. When we work in the getting active game, we're very lucky that there's a lot of people and organizations there to help that don't exist in some other more commercial sectors, pure commercial sectors.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what Steve was saying before he dropped off there, in that, you know, people's expectations are shaped by all their digital experiences. So, you know, people don't necessarily differentiate by sector. So, you know, we are competing with, from, you know, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Xbox Live, you know, they've set the bar really high when it comes to consumer expectations of digital experiences. And, you know, everybody wants something relevant, everybody wants something personal, and everybody wants them immediately. And so I think we do need to learn as a sector from what's working and implement the best bits. And as Steve says, absolutely collaborate. There is no point in trying to create something from scratch when there are multiple partners out there who can help you. And so can Sport England. You know, there's lots of work that we're doing to try and upskill, to train people, to support them as they move offers online. And, you know, lots of that stuff available on our website, or, you know, people come and talk to me.
And I definitely think this taps into a big vein of questions we're getting from the audience, which is all about what can they do. And I think it's interesting how the barriers people perceive. So one of the first questions that I think jumps out to me is, what do I do if I've got a small budget? How do I do this cost effectively? But it strikes me that you don't necessarily need a huge budget to make interesting things happen in this space. You know, perhaps, Stephen, while we've got you, we go back to you. Some of the examples you picked out earlier are really pretty small players doing just very clever stuff.
Yeah, but because of an awareness of their ability, their capabilities, and if you use that, understand where you want to go, what are your capabilities. Hopefully, you don't drop off now. That's how you set that journey away. Know where you want to get to, and it doesn't need to be lots of money. Ali's point: expectations on technology are huge. So, who are the right people to work with, and what are your limitations? If you're aware of that, you can push boundaries.
I think that's exactly right. And I think there's a danger for us to misuse this idea of digital, make it something enormous. You have to be everywhere and omnipresent to be successful. Because I think some of the best cases of success, I've seen people being super targeted in what they do. Lenka, I'm interested, with your breadth of experience working with clients, who's done a really good job of picking a particular niche and really going after it?
Yeah, I think hopefully I haven't missed much, but to your point, is being really targeted, and actually before jumping on any trends, is really understanding where you are now before you're going anywhere, before jumping on trends, really understanding your current situation, and that comes back to audience. So again, going on about it for a while, but it's really important to understand your audience, and especially in today's age, is where they are, what are their pain points, etc., and then define the strategy based on that. So really understand where you are now as a business, what you want to do, what are your business needs, but then think about your audience, and that will dictate your strategy. So even with a small budget, it's really important to even then create a strategy that works for your business, and that it's aligned on you with your vision as a business and mission as well.
And one of the trends you mentioned earlier, which I personally couldn't agree with more from an ESPN perspective, is the rise of personalities and athletes as really critical ways of engaging with people. I think people tend to engage with people, and that resonates really strongly. So how can organizations work more closely with the likes of you, Sasha, and you, David, to bring these things to life? Like, what would you want how would you want someone in the audience to approach you and get you involved? Anyone want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think for me personally, so I've built my online platform just by being me, and the whole point of being a personal trainer is that you bring your personality across. Essentially, everybody's teaching the same stuff. It's just a different way of being able to interact with people and get your information across to them. So I think the most important thing, and the thing that you've got to be aware of when you do approach online content creators or things like that, is they're probably already really successful in doing what they're doing. So by you trying to come to them and say, do this, it's probably not a good idea, because they're already engaged with their audience who engage with them on a daily basis, and they'll know the numbers that do engage with them, and they're doing that really well. And I've had a couple of instances in the last couple of weeks or so where I've had a briefing, it's like, do this, and I'm like, well, one, it will come across as a paid advert. Two, I know that's not going to resonate very well. So if you want to do it, let me do my own thing. And obviously you need to be a bit mindful about what the brand is that you're working with, how you're going to get that across and things. But I think content creators or people who've got that online presence or business who are doing things exceptionally well, they're the ones with the knowledge already. So it makes sense for you to try and piggyback what they're doing and then go down that route.
Can I jump in there, Charlie?
Please.
Yeah. I was just going to say, again, just agreeing with you there in terms of just being like, I'm just being myself. Everything that I've learned or decided or know that seems to be working, I just continue to do. But what's been really cool, I have been able to collaborate, and I've done stuff for JD Sports and Nike and actually that was the TikTok that went viral for me. I was able to bring my personality to their brand, and I was still able to, showcase what my brand is, and still allow people to see where they can find more of what I do. So collaborations in that way, I think, is really important, where you can both link in together, and it's been really successful.
And so there's an interesting question from the audience here, and I don't know if any of us will have the golden bullet for this, but I think it touches on an interesting point. So someone's asked how aquatic sports can tap into digital in this period, but let's take that slightly broader and go, if you're a sport where participation involves either facilities or other people, how do you get them engaged? It could be rugby to some extent, it could be aquatic sports. Any thoughts on what they can do to try and circumvent the world we find ourselves in today?
So I'd say, if I can go in, put yourself in their shoes. I mean, they will obviously, the audience, people watching you are struggling themselves. You know, how do they get back into a sport? And think about how you can still make them enjoy the sport, or maybe, you know, do some activity around it. I mean, Sasha's, your example is perfect. You know, can you do something that will help them then when everything goes back to normal? I don't know when that is, but again, try to put yourself in their shoes. Think about their sort of pain points is a good way to start as well. You know, what do they struggle with? And, you know, one of them will be potentially, for some audiences, will be the time, you know, talking about women and kids, not launching something potentially during daytime, something like later on that fits their schedule. So really, it goes back to the audience and really understanding what are the pain points. Maybe, you know, use your audience, use the members that you already have on database and speak to them, and see what they often give you an idea, good ideas, or speak to the influencers as well, those that fit in to your tone of voice, the way you sort of present the sport, etc. They might again have a couple of ideas and collaborate with them, and it can be a nice campaign and very effective one.
I think that's really smart. I think it's not any individual organisation to have all the answers, right? And often the great thing about so many of these sports, whether it's swimming, whether it's rugby, whatever it might be, is a lot of passionate advocates who already want to do more in that space. Lean on them to help. Makes a lot of sense. I'm also very much enjoying the live tour of a gym we're getting in David's backdrop, which is certainly added. But 1 second, I thought you were about to give us a swimming demonstration there, David.
Nothing that exciting. I just ran out of battery.
So I guess that is an interesting question. In the research you've been doing, Ali, are there specific sports that have been winning and losing in this, or is it more of a general activity trend that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, outside we've seen massive booms in cycling, walking, running. Now, some of that's tapered off quite a bit because society's opened up again, although sounds like about to close down again across much of the country. But I think it was more. I think what you saw was people who were already active finding new things to do. So somebody who might have played rugby, the example that you've given, you know, getting a bike, although it was really hard to get bikes early on in lockdown, or somebody who was used to swimming every morning, doing a workout on YouTube or whatever. So yeah, there have been some winners in terms of sports. I think the challenge now really actually is sustainability for those sports. So as the nights get darker, colder, wetter, as restrictions, you know, come back in, and you know, it does look like, although I'm not looking at the social media feed here, it does sound to me from WhatsApp messages I'm getting during the session that London will be in tier 2 tomorrow evening. So I think the challenge for those sports is to try and make that sustainable, and I hopefully we'll come on to it. But of course, there are a lot of audiences who haven't been really able to benefit at all from this trend toward digital fitness. So, you know, what happens there in the next 3 or 4 months will be a real challenge.
Well, yeah, let's come on to that now. So if you think about those audiences that have been somewhat disenfranchised by the conditions of lockdown and then the pivot towards digital that's come with it. I mean, first of all, maybe to kind of hone our mind, you know, Ali, do you want to just speak very briefly to the groups that you think are most fall into that bucket?
Yeah, so people aged 55 plus, you know, disabled people, you know, men more generally, people with long-term health conditions, and if you talk in this language, socioeconomic groups D and E. And just to briefly say, there are obvious reasons for some of this. So, you know, one of them is a general just preference for other activities. So men, for example, are doing less in the way of digital fitness at home, but they're doing higher levels of offline fitness at home, if that makes sense. And I think if I could just pick one other out, digital exclusion and cost is massive. So there are 6 million people in the UK who are digitally excluded, and that includes a whole lot of groups I just mentioned. So one of the things, if I could just mention, that we've been doing here is to remind people that actually it's not just about access to digital products, it's also about affordability of packages like data or equipment, lack of skills, lack of confidence. And one of the really interesting things that we have done, which I won't go into detail on, but through a fund that we have called Tackling Inequalities, we worked with Active Devon, so they're an active partnership, and we took a decision to pay for people's data because while they had access to a mobile phone, the data was draining like just too quickly when they were trying to stream activity sessions. So it's not just, I think, for these groups about access to the product, it's just much more nuanced. So they're just some of the reasons. There are loads of others, we've mentioned some of them, awareness of offers, starting from, an activity base, etc. But, there are some, for all the creativity and innovation, there are definitely some significant challenges here too.
I think that's obviously right. I guess speaks to some of the broader challenges society has to help ensure that digital exclusion doesn't exacerbate underlying problems within our society and inequalities in our society, I should say. I don't, have any of you seen any organisations that you think are reacting particularly well to support for those groups?
I could mention a couple if you don't mind me speaking again. There's some really interesting work going on by startups. So to mention one called Exty and one called Track Active, and they're basically, their business is started by physiotherapists, so they really understand the challenges, firsthand for people with long-term health conditions, and they're developing solutions specifically for them. So there's been some quite some really good stuff, I think, in the new business space actually over the last few months.
I think my personal experience is a yoga app that I have been using, but I know that they have offered, so that comes back to the cost and affordability of such app. They do offer either, you can contact them if you have problems, financial problems, and they can help you to get that, whether it is for free, whether you are a student or from one of those groups. So that's a sort of personal experience that I have seen that was actually a welcome and very nice from them.
And while I think it's not easy to always draw silver linings out of what have been a bunch of very difficult things happening from a global health and a global social justice perspective, I do think that most organisations are being much more deliberate in thinking about how they can ensure that communities that are otherwise excluded are being much better represented in their strategies and thinking. And long may that continue. As we move to the final 15 minutes of this session, I'll quickly call to each of you and maybe get some of your personal takeaways for what the audience can be doing to try and capitalize on the trends, or if not that, work around them. In no particular order, I didn't set an order in advance, so I'm going to put someone on the spot here. I will go with you, Lenka, first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think I've mentioned it a couple of times already. And again, when we help our clients to create a digital strategy, the key pillar is really understanding your audience. Obviously, firstly, understanding where you are. It's digital, connect your digital to your vision and mission, and don't use, in a way, digital as a destination. It's not a destination, it's a tool. It's a tool to help you achieve your business vision and mission. For me, it's really understand your audience, and it's more important now than even before, especially given current situation. Understand your audience, really nail down what do they want from you, what they might need from you, what are their pain points. That's a good way to start as well, and where they are. Like, that's a key. Who is your audience and where they hang out? So really, those important answer those important questions. That would be for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Lenka. And Stephen, I guess following on that, anything to add from a kind of key takeaway for the audience?
Yeah, following on from Lenka, be prepared that deploying that strategy is going to be really hard work. Writing the strategy isn't the hard part necessarily. I don't say it's easy. Deploying a product, a service, an offering is the really hard work. And staying true to your organizational values to inform that.
It makes an absolute ton of sense, and you're right. I think there's an easy view to see digital as somewhat easy, which is, I think, far from the truth, right? And as we see, maybe if I quickly switch to Sasha and say, Sasha, what would your takeaway be then, as someone who's done the hard work?
I think for me, it would just be a case of trying different things. seeing what does work, because I've definitely put content out before and it's not always been taken straight away. And speaking to your audience, like I think most people have said. So for me, it's, oh, what's happening? Sorry, guys.
No, we can hear you. Carry on, don't worry.
But yeah, basically just listen to your audience. I'm gutted that this is happening. Apologies.
Don't worry about it. This is a classic example of precisely why it isn't easy doing things digitally. And actually, I think that's a really great point that builds brilliantly on Stephen's. This idea of iteration being very important. You know, you can write any strategy you want, but the benefit and danger of digital is that you get instant feedback on stuff, and if you don't adapt to that and iterate on it, you risk falling behind. David, anything you want to add on that point of key takeaways?
Digitally first, and I think when I look at all the companies that I'm working with, F45, it's on a database, everything's interchangeable whether you're in the studio or at home. I work with a company called Fittest App, which is on-demand personal training with in-demand personal trainers. Again, they've started online digitally, and now they're looking to move into studios. And I'm also involved with a company called Rico Living, which basically is transforming trailers into gyms. So if anybody can't get planning permission at their home, or for whatever reason, they can have this in-home experience, but also having that equipment available. So I know the Fittest App are doing it. I'm looking to do it is partner with equipment suppliers so you can bring your digital platforms to life. So I just think it's having that digital first journey, and you can literally interchange between all of it depending on the situation. And I don't even think it's the pandemic at the moment that's happening. Like, we've got examples of people who have gone on holiday and then they just move over and transition onto the online platform. Then when they're back, they come into the studio. People have to isolate, they go online, studio, whatever it is. I think it's just one benefit to the consumer, but also it enables you to monetize what you're doing whenever, wherever.
I think that's coming loud and clear from all of you, is this idea that what's happening now may be because of COVID, it may be accelerated by COVID, but it's not just about COVID. This is about the future of how people get active as part of a blend of in-person and digital. Ali, let me throw back to you. What would be your key takeaway for the audience?
Yeah, I'm going to give an answer you'd expect someone from Sport England to give, I think, because we are so focused on inactive people and helping to change that. So I think I would say, because inequalities have continued to persist in this time, we think there's a really great opportunity for innovation in the digital space to support people who find it harder. And I'd encourage people to recognize the realities of life at the moment, and to really understand the barriers facing less active people, and try and come up with ideas to solve them. Now that's a really long game, but it's worth it. And I've given some good examples of people who are doing that already, but I just encourage people to think a bit differently and understand what's going on with people right now, and come up with solutions for that.
Yeah, it really strikes me from this whole conversation two very clear themes that I think are really important for the audience. So one, and this phrase that Disney uses a lot, is this idea of being intentional in what you do. It's very easy to kind of react to circumstances to deliver, but everything we've just spoken about, understanding your audience, understanding their pain points, working out how you're going to use digital to fix those pain points, otherwise achieve your business goals, and being really focused on that is critically important. Digital has, I think, been blighted for quite some time by a chase for numbers, and numbers don't help, right? What helps you achieving your business, and in this case, getting people active, and numbers inform that, they aren't going to guide it. And the second one, which this group is the perfect embodiment of, is a spirit of partnership. And I think it's super clear that for us to achieve our goals, we're going to need to collaborate really closely between people on the front line, such as Sasha and David, people in the brand space and the organization space and the NGB space, and then just being so grateful we have so many organizations there to help, like Sport England, like UK Active, like Seven League in the consultancy space. That's a real blessing for us all, I think. So I think that would be the two key things to walk away with here is, how do I be intentional about how I'm using digital? And let's find people to work with. None of us need to do it by ourselves. So it just remains for me, and again, we are super true to digital here. I think my camera's gone. I think Stephen's camera's gone. It's we're holding on by the merest thread here, but I can at least say, looking you in the faces, a massive thank you to Ali, to Sasha, to David, to Lenka, to Stephen for your time. A massive thank you to the audience. I hope we got to most of the questions. And if not, reach out to us via digital, and we'll get back to them then. Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.
you.